Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Jim Crispino. I'm Senior Director of Developer Evangelism here at Genesys. And today I've got with me Jacob Shaw, who's a software engineer on our developer engagement team, who's going to be talking about partial transcripts with Genesys Cloud. Before I hand the webinar over to Jacob, there's a couple of logistics. So we'll have a 10-minute, we'll try and reserve at least 10 minutes at the end for a Q&A. As Jacob is presenting, if you have a question, please use the Q&A button on Zoom to ask a question in the Q&A panel. And we will either answer those in the panel as the webinar is going on, or we'll hold them for Jacob at the end, depending on how knowledgeable we are. And then also, this tutorial is being recorded. We upload all of these to our YouTube channel, and you can get to those easily through our developer center. So if you go to developer.genesys.cloud and either click on the video link on the landing page or go directly to /video on the URL, you will be able to find all of our recorded DevCasts, not just this one, but all previous ones, and be able to view those. So with that, my job is done, and I will hand this over to Jacob. Jacob, it's all yours.
All right. You share my screen here. All right. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining. And like it was mentioned, we're going to be talking about partial transcription, how it fits into your application. So without further ado, we'll just get into it. So we'll go over an intro to what are partial transcripts, how can you use them, then we'll move into setup, and then we'll break that down into sort of the component parts of that, client app integration, OAuth, integrating the platform client SDK, some important things to know and resources, then we'll move into a demo, and then close with some closing thoughts from there. So a little bit about me. Software engineer. I graduated from the University of Georgia in 2018 with a bachelor's in computer systems engineering. Working with Genesys since last year. Been working mainly on the developer center. So I worked with a few companies before that as a contractor, and planning on getting my AWS certification this year. All right, so we'll move into the intro. So what are they? We know what the word transcript is. So in this context, it's in voice calls. It's a transcription from those voice calls, and it's using speech-to-text technology. And they're going to be generated anytime that the voice transcription settings are enabled in the admin settings. So what can we do with them? We can subscribe to them with our notifications API, and we can receive those partial transcripts in near real time. And then that will enable us to do event handling, which we could take in many different directions. So how does it work? So it's using our Genesys Cloud API to store those partial transcripts. And then the user can take that conversation ID associated with the call and subscribe using the notifications API to specifically this topic that's shown here, to subscribe to get notifications and then receive those. And now this graph over here is showing the call between customer and agent that gets stored over in the API. And then we're going to use the client application to interact with the notifications API. And in our case with the demo, we're going to use the analytics API as well to get the active conversations for a specific queue. So we'll get into the setup. So we're going to go over queues, call flows. I'll just let you guys read if you want. So when you're developing your application, a good consideration is to have your own dedicated test queue. That way you're not intermingling with live traffic And it also guarantees that your tester can be the active agent for the calls that are routed through the queue. And now we're just going to move into some pieces that you may be aware of. You may already have these in place, but I'm just going to sort of briefly touch on them since they are part of the solution. So we're going to need an inbound call flow, and you can create these in Architect. And these are going to allow you to route calls coming in from the customer to a queue. So that's how we're going to be using them. You can do a lot of different things with them, but we're just going to be using the transfer to ACD action. And that way, when dial pad touches are registered from the customer, that we can use that to route to the queue. So the next thing we're going to need is a route assignment. You can find this in the admin section under routing and call routing, and you'll just give it a name. Then you'll link it up with that inbound call flow that we just created. And this is going to allow you to assign a telephone DID number to that call flow. So then by that same token, we need to make that assignment in the DID number section, or excuse me, DID assignments. And that's going to be in the admin section as well. And we'll link that up with the call route that we just created. Okay, now this one is important. These need to be enabled for the partial transcripts to work. So we're going to have to set these to enabled in two places. Within the queue, so your test queue, you're going to go to the voice section and make sure that voice transcription is enabled there. And then also in quality admin, speech and text analytics, there's going to be another setting that we need to enable. Okay, so we'll get into the client app integration. So why are we using this? Client application is going to allow us to embed our custom application into the Genesys Cloud app. In our case, we're going to be using an iframe and a widget that's going to allow us to embed that custom application within the overall Genesys Cloud. So this is just a little bit about how to add it. Again, you may or may not know how to do this, but it can at least be a refresher. So in integrations in the admin, you're going to add a new integration, and you're going to select this client application. Can give it a name. And then in the configuration, we're going to want the application URL to match up with the URL where your custom application is served. So in my case, that's going to be localhost 3000. And then you give it an application type. We're going to use a widget. And during the demo, I'll show you where that can be found within the app. And lastly, but not leastly, we need to set it to active. Okay, so moving on into OAuth, there's some OAuth setup we need to do. So why are we using OAuth? It's an authorization protocol that Genesys Cloud uses for its REST-based HTTP requests. And since our application is going to make authenticated requests, we're going to need an OAuth client. We're going to use an implicit grant type, which is a single-step grant type that works with browser-based applications since we're using a user context. So this is just a little more in depth on the implicit grant. Like I said, it's a single-step process where you log in as the user and then you directly get your token back. Whereas like an authorization code grant would be two-step where you get a code back and then you would make another request to get the token. Okay, so now with that in mind, we can add the OAuth client, and that's going to be in the OAuth section of admin. So you're going to give it a name, description, token duration. If you want to adjust that, you can. And we're going to select implicit grant. And now in these redirect URIs, this is going to sort of match up with the client app integration where we give it the same URI where our application is running. And we're going to give it some scopes down here. And I'll talk more about those. So the OAuth scopes are basically demarcating the API resources that are available in the application, and it's going to restrict the API resources that it doesn't need. So these are sort of like bare bones scopes that you would need for your partial transcripts, and you may or may not use more depending on your application and what you need to do with it. These are just a few resources that we're going to use within this application. So we're going to be using the notifications API. So we're going to want to create a channel, be able to subscribe to topics. And in our case, we're going to want to query for conversation details. So these are endpoints associated with that. So these are some of the topics, the notification topics we're going to be using. We're going to use this to get any call updates, any new active conversations, and then users call associated. If you want to do it this way, you could to get the updated active conversations. And then this is the one that's going to give us our transcription notifications. There's some helpful links. API Explorer is very helpful, allows you to make requests using a UI and get back real responses. And it's a good way to test your API requests. Same thing with Analytics Query Builder. It's just a little more fine-tuned for the analytics requests. And notification is a good way to test out your notifications. Now we're going to talk about integrating the platform client SDK. So we got the setup out of the way. You can choose the SDK that you need for your application. In our case, we're going to be using the JavaScript SDK. So you're going to import that, and then you're going to configure the client ID and redirect URI from your OAuth client. And then you can, at that point, use the SDK to make your requests and get your partial transcript set up. So this is in the JavaScript case. We're going to install, import. You can see a little more about that down here if you want. Now this is how we're going to authenticate and add the OAuth client into our configuration. So this is a config file where we're going to have our client ID that we got from that OAuth client, as well as the redirect URI. And then at that point, we're able to use the SDK to log in, and that's going to return back some data verifying that we have indeed authenticated. Okay, so now that we've authenticated, you can subscribe to this topic specifically, and you may need to subscribe to other topics, but this is sort of like if you're using partial transcripts, you're definitely going to be using this one. All right, so with all that being said, I'm going to move over and first show some code and talk about what this application is going to do. So this is going to be the Active Conversations dashboard. And this is what's going to be in our client app integration. So the way this is going to use the partial transcripts is it's going to be a dashboard primarily for supervisors, where we'll get a list of queues for the organization. And then within those queues, we're going to be able to see the active conversations for each of those. And then we can expand those conversations to see some more details about them, like such as the agent, what time it started, and then the transcripts themselves. And then we're also going to be able to have a standing that we associate with each conversation. So that would be the event handling. In this case, it's sort of a silly example. We'll talk about like more real world concrete examples, but I'm just going to say that we have these bad words that we're going to use that are because you can't say those. So that's just going to be our example. So I'm just going to cover the partial transcript aspects of this application. I'm not going to get too much into anything else. First, I'll show the client config. This is what we're showed on the slides here. So this is how we're configuring for authentication. I'm going to go back to queue list. This is what is displaying all those queues for the organization. And on initialization, what we're going to do is we're going to authenticate. And then after authentication, we're going to create a channel, a notifications channel. From there, we're going to go out and get all the queues for the organization. We're going to set those. And then for each one of those queues, we're going to go and get the active conversations for those queues. And that's going to be the analytics query. And I'll go a little more in depth into these functions that are being called. So from there, we're going to get the active conversations. And for each one of those, we're going to tease out a little bit more info about the agents that are assigned to those conversations, including their image, agent name. So from there, I'm going to get the combined response and then set those queues. And then for each one of those queues with the conversations, we're going to subscribe to the topic for that queue to get any new incoming active conversations, or we'll be able to tell if a new conversation has started or ended. So in the subscription, you can see we've got this topic here. And then we define a callback so that anytime we get a message or a notification, we can handle that how we want to. So what we're doing here is if a conversation has ended, we're going to determine that using the participants states. And if it is, then we're going to remove that subscription. Picking up new conversations. And then for each one of these conversations, we're going to subscribe to the transcripts. So that's going to be its own subscription down here. And now we're using this topic for the transcripts. And for each one of these, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to have this callback that handles each transcript. So what we're going to be doing is just tagging those new partial transcripts on to the existing ones and show them in sort of a scrolling window. And we're also going to be analyzing those transcripts and assigning a standing to the conversations based on those. Okay, so I'm going to come over here to the Genesys Cloud utils and go a little more in depth into those functions that I showed. So this is where we're using the SDK, the platform client. So we're requiring that up here along with the client config. And then authenticate is going to pass those credentials like the client ID and the redirect URI in. And that's going to call the SDK's built-in function for doing that. And same goes for all of these. Like it's going to use the SDK's built-in functions to make a REST API request and then return the promise or handle the promise. So we've got get the agent, get queues, get active conversations. It's going to be the analytics query. Okay, so let's see. So now I'll just show the notifications controller. This is how we're going to subscribe to our topics. So we can see when we create the channel, that's the first thing we're going to do. We're going to create that channel, and that's going to return a URL that we can connect using a WebSocket, and then define how to handle these messages that come back. And in our case, we're going to be invoking the callback that we defined in QList for that topic. So when we created those callbacks in QList, that's where they're getting invoked, is in socket message. And just a couple functions down here for adding subscriptions and removing them. So I think that's all the code I wanted to show. So now we can come over here and actually try to test it if network speeds cooperate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call up the call flow that we created. And we're on queue. So we should be receiving a call here momentarily once this routes through the inbound call flow. Yeah, let me navigate here.
Thank you for choosing transcription queue.
Okay, so we get the call. Okay, so I'm now assigned as the agent to this conversation. Oh, you know what? Let me, sorry about this. I think the page has been sitting too long. Just gonna have to have a little bit of patience here. And if this runs too long, we can move on past this. Like I said, the network speed sometimes will cooperate. I found on Zoom, and other times they won't. Okay, so we've got the apps. We have to wait a little bit more. Apologize for this. Let's see, let's close this out. Okay, so hopefully, let's give it one more shot. So I'm going to call up the call flow here. And then navigate. And I'm going to answer that call. Okay, we might have to skip this, unfortunately, with the network speeds. Unfortunately, I would like to show it, but at least we see the dashboard. So we got the active conversation dashboard. And then each one of those queues is going to have an active conversation. So we'll close out of this. Like I said, I've been able to get this working normally, but I've found that if I'm on Zoom at the same time, I encounter some issues. But so we have these queues and active conversations, and within each of these, we're going to see the active conversations, and you'll be able to expand those out and get some information about the user, the agent. You'll be able to see an image, and then you'll get the start time for that conversation. I'll try one more time. Yeah, it's just not cooperating with the Zoom. So sorry about that, but we'll just move on past that. But we would be able to see the standing along with the transcripts, and then just the demonstration. So we'll move on past. So let's move into some closing thoughts about it. So what we just saw there was a case of a dashboard for the supervisor, where you sort of get an overall view of the active conversations going on in the organization at a queue level. And then each one of those calls has a standing attached to it. So some other things that you could consider using this for are reinforcement of agent prompts. So if you've got a spiel that for your agent that you want them to be able to give, and that's not coming up in the transcripts, you could use some sort of modal or hint to advise the agent to say, hey, mention this to the customer. And then on the other side of this, on the customer side of things, you could analyze what the customer is saying and then give hints to the agent based on the sorts of questions they're asking. And you could do this like with keyword matching, or if you want to go in more in depth, you could use like AI to give recommendations, documents, like sorts of hints that could help out with what the customer is asking. So with that, I'm just going to open up to QA and see if there's any questions.
All right, thanks, Jacob. That was great. I will add to Jacob's suggestions there at the end. You know, we have a blueprint on the Developer Center today for building Agent Assist on digital channels, where we get the chat stream or the messaging stream and offer up content based on those streams. Using the near real-time transcription, you can do the same for voice calls. It's just an additional subscription that you make. You get the voice as text and can do those lookups to an NLU engine and offer up suggestions to agents. So it's a pretty easy exercise for a developer to take those blueprints that we have and expand on them. So Robert asks, is there a plan to add a topic spotting notification endpoint? I don't know, Jacob, do you know that? We're not the product team, so I don't know that we know the roadmap necessarily for this feature.
Yeah, I have not seen anything in talking with the product team on that yet. What I would recommend is I would definitely open this out in our ideas portal. But to this date, I have not seen anything else related to like topic spotting or anything like that. I think one of the things that I have talked to the product team about is they're actively looking at decreasing the amount of time it takes for the partial transcript to be processed. Right now, it's about a 10-second lag. And they would like to get that down more so that you're getting more real-time notifications. The other thing I wanted to point out too is if anybody wants to actually see the partial transcript notifications kind of in action, I know Jacob was having some problems with the demo because of the lag with Zoom. We did actually record a dev drop a while back when partial transcripts first came out. I think Jacob actually was the one who did that dev drop, and in there you can kind of see it in action. I posted the link in the chat out to that dev drop, and I would highly recommend that people take a look at the blueprints, go out to the blueprints. We do have a partial transcript blueprint that has all the code that Jacob has out there for this demonstration out in the blueprint repository. I hope that answers your question.
Hey, Carl, Robert's asked another one. So why do we call it a partial transcript? Is it not the full transcript? It's partial because we're doing it on the fly. It's not. It's distinct from after the call. We've analyzed the whole thing and we've got the entire transcript. You're only getting the part of the transcript we have up to that point. So, I mean, technically, it's the full transcript up to that point in time. It's just not the full entire conversation transcript after the call completes. And I'll say, it's not real time. And I think I've been told it will be hard for Genesys to ever get to real time transcription events, because if you think about, I don't know, if you all use your phone and you ask Siri or you ask Google Assistant something, as you talk, or maybe you're using your voice to text, as you talk, you'll sometimes see those assistants go back and change words in the transcript because now they have context of the full sentence, and they'll just go back and modify that. So I've been told our transcription does the same thing. If we were to send you every word as the person uttered it, we may not recognize the word exactly. But once we get enough context, we can make a pretty good determination of what the person was speaking, and that's when we generate the event. At least that's what I've been told. So that's why it's near real time, just so that we can make it, we have enough confidence in what we're sending over the event that it is what the speaker was speaking. If the call disconnects, let's see. So if the call disconnects, will you lose 10 seconds of the transcript if you disconnect the webhook on disconnect of the call? You potentially, yes. That event at the very end, if we haven't sent that last little bit and you disconnect the web socket, so you're not going to get that, yes, you may miss it. And at which point you would have to use the APIs to go pull the actual finished transcript of the entire call, like you would see in our performance dashboards when you go into performance and interactions and you can view the transcript there. You'd have to get the transcript in the same way that interaction panel gets it.
Yeah, and I can add that too, because remember the WebSocket piece was originally about with the notification service was for UI integration, and so it has some of the, I'll say quote unquote brittleness of WebSockets. If you lose a network, if you lose the WebSocket, any messages sent to that point are gone. If you have a higher level requirement, partial transcripts, especially if they're not UI based, I would recommend you use the AWS Event Bridge, because those messages are AWS Event Bridge integration, because those messages are actually queued up until they're consumed by you. So as they come over, if there's a network interruption or the client closes the application, an AWS Event Bridge will still be listening for those notifications and sending them on to whatever you're consuming them with in your AWS account.
All right. Well, I see no more questions in the Q&A panel. And Jacob, you did a great job. Thanks for showing us that. Always educational. And the video should be out on our YouTube channel in a couple of days. It takes us a few days to get that transcribed and uploaded. If you have any questions on transcription or anything else, our Developer Center has our forum. Please post into there, and our team will be monitoring those and responding as needed. So thank you for your time today, and we'll catch you next month.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.